Hello guys! Welcome to our channel! Our topics for today's video is all about the early Middle Ages. The subtopic will be tackled is the medieval civilization develops in Europe, a feudal system takes shape, and the life centers on the middle. So, question. What comes in your mind when you heard about the words the early Middle Ages?
And have you ever wondered what happened in early Middle Ages life?
And how will the subtopic affect the early Middle Ages?
So, let us proceed to our discussion.
The early Middle Ages. It is started during the 500 to 1050 Anno Domini. It created a new civilization, or medieval civilization. It started because the fall of Rome and the Germanic kingdom arises. Aside from that, the European culture shifted from lands of Mediterranean Sea to region that had barely been touched by the Greco-Roman civilization. During the new civilization, there are few but strong rulers and governments. Their political system was divided in many landlords, which affect the economic and social life of the people because those lords held large estates. The Christian Church also influenced political and social life in that period. Both traditions of Rome and Germanic contribute a part in creating the new way of life in medieval Europe. For subtopic 1, the medieval civilization develops in Europe. It started when the decline of Roman Empire in the West left confusion to the Western and Central Europe. The strong government vanished, economic life was turmoil. The Roman Empire was the mainly strength and organization of the Christian Church that provides feeling of unity in Europe. A time change. When the time changed, Germanic custom replaced Roman ways. They established kingdom in North Africa, Italy, Spain, Gaul, and England. That land belonged to the Romans before. They also hoped to share advantages, but the Roman world had grown too weak to be revived. The Roman empires had been called a world of cities with a rich culture. But when the empire fell, many towns vanished. They fled to country states to settle again. Everything shifted from countryside. Germanic invaders were rural people. They didn't even try to build or change or revive the old cultural centers. They are divided into tribes, and the honesty and loyalties are only in the tribe and chieftain. They viewed as the personal property of the rulers because they cannot serve and pledge their loyalties to others, only for their chieftain. By custom, they divided up their lands and gave them to their sons that caused frequent war. The Romans and Germanic laws also different. Roman laws was written and Germanic laws was unwritten. Eventually, some Germanic rulers had the tribal law written. The justice system of them are different also, because the Roman courts judge had investigate and provide evidence, while the Germanic judge trial by ordeal to determine guilt. They tied the suspect and threw to the river. Those who sank proven to be not guilty, and those who float was said to be the guilty. Learning declines. Because the Roman was the center of the teaching, after the fall, many Roman schools disappeared. Few except to the clergy or priests that learned to read or write. Latin of Rome was no longer the major language they used in Roman provinces before. The knowledge of Greek almost lost, but few people could read Greek, works of literature, science, or philosophy. Among the Germanic tribes, there was no written literature. Their alphabet called runes was used mainly in inscriptions on monuments. Some scholars preserve learning. Compared to the time of Pax Romana, 6 to 8 centuries seem a dark age, yet it is still existing. The scholars prepared Greco-Roman knowledge. The Ostrogoth King Theodoric, who ruled Italy from 493 to 526, admired the Roman. He also encouraged scholarship to his court. The Roman was Brutus, who translated some of Aristotle's writing from Greek into Latin and wrote mathematics, and Cassiodorus, who collected, copied, and translated ancient manuscripts which almost lost. He also monks who founded monastery and retired after it. In other parts of Europe, churchmen also helped to preserve learning. In Spain, in the early 7th century, Bishop Isidore of Seville wrote an encyclopedia covering many topics: mathematics, music, astronomy, medicine, religion, zoology. In 731, the Venerable Bede, a scholarly English monk, completed a history of the Church in England. Written in Latin, Bede's work is generally regarded as the finest history written in the Middle Ages. The Medieval Church. The Church has a strong influence on the medieval civilization because that time the Roman Empire break up that caused chaos and destruction. It was a formative time for the people in Europe. They are struggling to recover. The Germanic, Christian, and Roman were being woven together into a new start. The Christianity was the guiding force. The contact of Rome and Germanic tribe increased during empire's decline. After the fall of Rome, the missionaries carried the process of conversion. Church was in the lead. Their government and society is scattered, but the church reunited them. Nearly everyone saw the church as guardian and interpreter of religious truth in medieval Europe. They believed that the only way to heaven is through church. By obeying the church, they believe they will be saved or gain salvation. The church developed a strong organization. Because the Roman Empire lay here, church developed strong organization that the leading officials are bishops. There are also most influential bishops, those in major cities or oldest and largest Christian communities like Rome, Constantinople, Jerusalem, Milan, and Antioch. Bishops are like supervisors of the priests. They know everything in their district. Bishop in Rome later called Pope, as we also address in the high position in church, the head of church. They believe it was inherited to Peter I, Bishop of Rome, the responsibilities for the souls of all Christians. They felt the duty to lead in the right path. Pope Gregory I is the most important early pope, or Gregory the Great. He held a position from 590 to 604. Under him, they not only watched Christian spiritual lives, but also took overs to the government. Church played political affairs in part of Europe. Local priest was their connection to the church because priests teach, helps, and gave advices and also led special ceremonies and administered sacraments. Monks and nuns also do works of church. They both took vows and devoted themselves to God. Monks live in monasteries while nuns in convents. They both followed rules and guidelines of Saint Benedict, the founder of monastery at Monte Cassino in Italy in 529. Monks made valuable contribution. They teach methods of farming and skills like carpentry and weaving to the peasants that works in monastery lands. Monks and nuns also establish hospitals, provide shelter for travelers. Monks keep classical learning alive by reading and writing Latin, studying and copying ancient manuscripts. It was work of art. They made it beautifully decorated and illustrated. Saint Patrick had converted the Irish to Christianity in the early 4th century. The monasteries of England and Ireland play a particularly important role in preserving learning. In Ireland, Latin became the language of both the church and of scholars at a time when it was in danger of disappearing. Some Irish scholars could read Greek long after such knowledge had almost completely disappeared elsewhere in Western Europe. During the early Middle Ages, monks and nuns, particularly in Ireland and England, also served as missionaries and spread Christianity. They converted many Germanic pagans to Christianity. Pagans are those who are satanic. In this way, they helped to shape a common Christian civilization for most Europe. To the people of the Middle Ages, monks and nuns were selfless people who devoted their lives to God. They were viewed as providing the finest example of the Christian way of life. A new medieval style of government appeared in the kingdom of the Franks, a Germanic people. The Franks had migrated westward from their homeland in the valley of the Rhine River. As Rome's border defenses weakened in the 4th and 5th centuries, Frankish tribes settled in the Roman territory. A Frankish ruler named Clovis united the various Frankish tribes and conquered the Romans and other Germans in northern Gaul. Clovis married a Christian, Clotilda, and after a successful battle, he and his warrior converted to Christianity. A few years later, he captured part of the Visigoths' kingdom in southern Gaul. Only a defeat by the Ostrogoth king Theodoric kept Clovis from taking all the Gaul. After Clovis died, however, the Frankish lands were divided among his sons. The rulers gradually lost much of their powers to nobles who held large estates. In each Frankish kingdom, real power fell into the hands of the king's chief officer, who was known as the mayor of the palace and was closely allied with the land-owning nobles. Frankish lands are united. Pepin II was one of the mayor of the palace. He triumphed over the mayors of rival kingdoms and reunited the Frankish lands. Pepin rules all the Franks. He had son Charles Martel, which means Charles the Hammer, who inherited the title and the lands. From 717 to 741, he ruled as the mayor of the palace over the most of the Gaul. Charles' Frankish forces defeated an invading Muslim army at Battle of Tours. A mayor of the palace becomes king. Pepin the Short, son of Charlemagne, was given the title King of the Franks instead of Mayor of the Palace. The Pope in Rome and the Frankish nobles approved the change. Establishing a custom for later rulers, the people crowned Pepin as king by the god Grace. The Pope supported Pepin because he wanted the Franks to protect the church from the Lombards, another Germanic people. The Lombards were threatening the papal lands around Rome. Pepin invaded Italy, defeated the Lombards, and gave the Pope the territory between Rome and Ravenna. This region became known as Papal States. Charlemagne promotes learning and expands his kingdom. Pepin's sons Charlemagne, or Charles the Great, became the king of the Franks. Charlemagne, an extraordinary figure in medieval history. Over 6 feet tall, he was described by the monk Enhard as large and strong loofy stature. With a stately and dignified appearance, Charlemagne said, Enhard was devoted to his children. He was so careful of the training of his sons and daughters that he never took his meal without them when he was at home, and never made a journey without them. A devout Christian, Charlemagne had a beautiful church built at Aachen, his capital, and attended service there regularly. Enhard described how this warrior king of the Franks was attracted to the cultures of the ancient Greece and Rome. He was not satisfied of his native language, but he gave attention to the study of foreign ones. He is such a master of Latin that he could speak it as well as his native tongue. He also could understand Greek better than he could speak it. as Charlemagne. He also tried to write, but because he began late in life, his efforts met with ill success. He hoped to improve the training of his officials in the clergy, so he brought some of the finest scholars in Europe, and directed by the English monk Alcuin, they collected books and read the works of ancient Roman authors. These scholars wrote poems, histories, and religious work in which they imitated the style of Roman literature. While they produced no great works of philosophy or science, they did help to keep interest in ancient writings alive. Charlemagne expanded his kingdom by conquering the Lombard kingdom in Italy and taking part of northern Spain from the Muslims. He also added Bavaria in what is now Germany to his kingdom, and after terrible wars, forced the Germanic Saxons to submit to his rule and convert to Christianity. Charlemagne is crowned Emperor of the Romans on Christmas Day in the year 800. The Pope who crowned him is Pope Leo III. This indicates that the Roman idea of a strong centralized government had not died. Doubtless, some believe that Charlemagne was reviving the Roman Empire. Charlemagne's empire did not, however, have Roman law or political organization. It had no great cities that could serve as centers of trade and learning. Charlemagne's empire, in fact, was the sign of something new. Charlemagne was a German whose government grew out of Germanic custom. He was also a Christian who spread the faith, protected the church against its enemies, and was crowned emperor by the Pope. Scholars in his kingdom preserved the learning of the Greco-Roman past. This blending of Germanic, Christian, and Roman elements came to characterize the civilization of the Middle Ages.
Subtopic 3: Life centers on the manure. The wealth of feudal lords came from the labor of the peasants who lived on their land. In the last year of the Roman Empire, many peasants had begun to work for landowners instead of owning their own land. Some peasants gave their land to nobles in return for protection. Other peasants lost their lands because of debt. At early Middle Age, few peasants owned the land they farmed. Peasants become serfs. The overwhelming majority of people in medieval Europe were peasants. Most peasants were serfs, who did not have the freedom to leave the land where they were born. When a new lord acquired a fief, he acquired the serfs as well. Serfs live in a small village on the lord's estate or manure. From the lord, the serf receive housing and land to farm. In return, they farm the lord's land, look after his animal, and did other tasks on the estate. Feudalism was the basic political arrangement during the Middle Age. Manorialism was the basic economic system. Only the toil of peasants made this way of life possible. For neither the nobility nor the clergy did work that produced goods. The manure is a self-sufficient world. Each lord owned at least one manure. Great lords owned many. The church also held many manures. 15 to 30 families usually live in the village on the manure. Besides the serfs' cottage, the village included the lord's castles or manure house. A church and workshop surrounding the village were fields, pasture land, and forest. In the forest were wild animals that the lord hunted. In the pastures, cattle, sheep, and horses grazed. If the soldiers of another lord attacked a manure, the peasant found protection inside the walls around the manure's house. Almost everything needed for their life was produced on the manure. The people of the manor raised grain and other crops in its field and orchards. Carpenters in Masun did the building and repairing, and blacksmiths made weapons for knights and tools for household use. Women spun wool into thread and wove the thread into fabric for clothing. A priest tended to the religious needs of the people, while goods such as salt and iron had to be obtained from the outside. The manure was largely self-sufficient, able to produce almost everything it needed. Medieval farmers shared land in labor. Medieval farmers understood that the soil loses its fertility if the same crops are planted year after year. They used compost and manure to enrich the soil, but there was never enough fertilizer. To keep the soil from losing its fertility, farmers used a two-field system. One field was kept idle or fallow, while the other was planted half with spring wheat and other crops and half with winter wheat and grain. The following year, the field that had been planted was left fallow, and the fallow field was farmed. Each field was divided into strips. Many of these strips belonged to the Lord, but some were set aside for the serfs. Because the fields were not all equally fertile, each serf was given strips in several different fields. A single farmer could not plow and harvest without help. The plow was heavy, the oxen small, and the harness poor. As many as 8 oxen might be needed to pull a plow. Serfs thus shared their oxen and worked together to get the land plowed and the crops harvested. Each family received the produce from its own strips, but all the plowing and harvesting were done cooperatively.
The serf has rights as well as duties. They own many obligations to their lords. They had to bake their bread in the lord's oven, grind their wheat in the lord's mill, and press their grapes in his winepress. They paid for these services by giving the lord of the manors part of the crops they grew on their own strips of land. They also dug ditches, gathered firewood, built fences, and repaired roads and buildings. Beside helping in the fields, women made clothing for the lord's family. Each serf worked about 3 days a week for the lords. They could not leave the manor without the lord's permission. The lord could even decide whom a serf would marry. Serfs who did not wish to marry the person the lord chose for them could pay a fine instead. Although serfs were not free, their rights were protected by custom. Their children could not be taken from them and sold. As long as serfs carried out their duties to their lord, they could live in their cottages and farm their strips of land. If a lord tried to take away these rights, serfs might resist by refusing to work. Serfdom is a harsh way of life. They live in crowded 1 or 2 room cottages. The roofs were made of thatch and the walls were mud-plastered logs. The floors were often hard pounded dirt. In winter, the open windows were closed with wooden shutters or stopped with straw. There was no chimney. Smoke from the hearth seeped out through the thatched roof. Rough benches, a table, beds, and perhaps a storage chest were the only furniture. The serfs might share their homes with chickens and pigs. Unlike the lord, serfs almost never sat down to a feast. They ate simple diet vegetables, coarse brown bread, grain, cheese, and soap. Honey from their beehives sweetened their food. Fresh meat, milk, and butter were luxuries. The wild animals in the forest belonged to the lord. Serfs are forbidden to hunt them. When their crops failed, they faced starvation. Their life was hard and tiring. Men and women worked in the fields from sunrise to sunset. This backbreaking labor left them exhausted and made them age quickly. Disease often crippled and killed their children. Warring lords might destroy their homes, steal their animals, and ruin their crops. The serfs' way of life was passed on to their children. They too were born into a life of serfdom. Although serfs had hard lives, they did have some simple pleasures. Traveling minstrels and entertainers, acrobats, bear trainers, and actors visited the manors. Wrestling and football were the other forms of amusements. Serfs gathered in front of the village church to sing and dance during holidays. Serfs rarely left the manor where they lived. Dense forests separated one manor from another. Poor roads and few bridges made travel difficult for everyone. Thieves and warring knights made it dangerous. Peasants lived, worked, and died on the lord's estate and were buried in the village churchyard. They knew almost nothing of the outside world. Most serfs accepted their position in life. Rebellion was rare until the 14th century. Lords simply had too much military and legal power for serfs to oppose them effectively. Moreover, the serf, like everyone else in the medieval times, believed that God determined a person's place in society and that some people were meant to be nobles and others serfs. Men of lowly birth sometimes joined the clergy, and a few became abbots or bishops. Conferred knighthood upon a peasant who distinguished himself in battle. Nevertheless, most serfs simply accepted their position in hope for a better life in the world to come.
Subtopic 2. A feudal system take shape. Charlemagne's great empire in Western and Central Europe was held together primarily by the strong personality of its ruler, but it was not strong enough to survive after Charlemagne died in 840. Therefore, the great landowners and nobles once again came into power. There were had political system, but no strong ruler or government. Charlemagne's empire breaks apart. Charlemagne's son, Louis the Pious, inherited the throne of his father and tried to preserve father's empire, but all of his effort was resisted by the Frankish nobles who sought to increase their own power at the expense of the emperor. After Louis died in 840, his three surviving sons agreed in the Treaty of Verdun to divide the empire map. Charles took the west part, and Louis the German in the east, and while in the middle part fought over by their brother Lothar. And because of the breakup of the empire, the Carolingian kings lost their authority over the nobles who held large states. It divided again politically, but the Carolingian kings lost their authority over the nobles who held large states. It divided again politically, but also meant an invasion. Vikings raiders terrorized Europe. In 19th century, Europe was invaded from several directions. The most fearsome invaders were the Vikings or Northmen, the ancestors of the Norwegians, Swedes, and Danes of the days. Those Vikings came from the forests of Scandinavia. They are excellent shipbuilders, adventurous seamen, and ferocious warriors. Vikings established their settlement between 850. During the 19th century, Viking bands raided coastal settlements in Western Europe and pushed inland along the rivers, where they landed their lotted settlements in terms of slavery and killed the local people, and also they burned their homes and villages. Europe faces another invaders. Vikings were not only invaders of Europe at early Middle Ages, but there were Magyars, also originally nomads from Central Asia. They are superb horsemen. They swept across the broad Danube plain in Italy and southern Germany. Along the Mediterranean, people faced raid by other invaders except from Vikings and Magyars. From their bases in Spain and North Africa, Muslims pirates attacked also a coastal region and captured Mediterranean islands. The invasion still continued until early in the 20th century and made bad terrible consequences for Western Europe. Like the earlier Germanic invasion, they weakened capital authorities, disrupted trade, hurt agriculture, and left settlements and monasteries in ruins. People at the time never looked at the central authority, but instead to their local lords who had owned their arms. Because at the time, the one who had political power were the lords, not the kings. Feudalism develops in Western Europe. Living in an age of warfare and disorder, lords sought allies among their fellow nobles. The basis for these alliances was the lord's land. In exchange for military assistance in other services, one lord granted land called a fief to a nobleman. The one who received land called vassal. The lord's relationship to vassal was cemented by a solemn ceremony in which the vassal pledged loyalty in the lord. The system of relationship of lord granting land to vassal was called feudalism and became main political arrangement after the division of empire happened in 19th century. The feudalism system set up new relationship. Feudalism affected all classes of population in the society in medieval time. In return of vassal pledge of loyalty to their lords, they received the lord's protection and a grant of land. There were peasants who lived on the fief, were included in the lord's grant also. Peasant is a poor farmer or farm worker who has low social status in society. They raised their crops that supported the vassals and they too expected protection in time of trouble. The vassal's obligation responsible to the lord. The lord vassals owed the lord several other obligations. Vassals had to aid the lord in war and were supposed to raise ransom money if the lords captured by enemies. Vassals had to provide belongings when the lords traveled through their territory. Vassal gave a gift when the lord's son was knighted and when his eldest daughter married. Vassals sat in the lord's court and helped to judge cases involving disputes between the lord and other vassals. Relationship of vassals and lords are complex. Vassals might grant land to other nobles and in this way become his lord. In that instances, both clash between two lords to whom a vassal had sworn his loyalty. Then, after vassals had to decide which of the lords to support. Feudalism draws on earlier customs. In some ways, feudalism grew out and became tradition of the Germanic tribes. The Germanic warriors had pledged their loyalty to heads of war bands. The oath of loyalty made by vassal to his lords grew out and practiced it. Feudal law included many elements of Germanic law, and feudal attitude reflected Germanic respect for the warrior. Lords of Warriors. At age when warfare was common, the feudal lord had been primarily a warrior. Through combat, lords protected their lands, enlarged their states, and added to their wealth. Young noble was trained to be knight. He learned how to wear armor, ride a war horse, and fight with sword and lance. When time comes that young noble proved his ability and courage, he was knighted in an impressive ceremony. He also earned glory and respect of their fellow nobles. To be skillful one, he spent time each day in practicing with their weapons. Lord occasionally held tournaments contests in which knights took part in mock combat. The winner in these said tournaments won a praise and honor as well as valuable prizes. Knighthood reflects Christian ideals. In 12th century, a code of behavior called Chivalry had the knight should be expected to do the following. A true knight was expected to fight bravely to be loyal to his lord and treat other knights with respect and courtesy. He was also expected to protect women, children, and the weak. Expected to be a Christian gentleman who honored church law and defended the church against its enemies. In the time, as the priest blessed the future knights, weapons and prayed that the knights would always defend the justice and right. Also, the church added a religious elements to the warrior culture of the feudal knight. And the day passed, the church recognized that the warfare among lords contributed to disorder. They tried to impose the peace of God and the truth of God, which they restricted the feudal warfare to a certain days and year, and it becomes effective. Castles are fortified against attack. The first castles were built in the 19th century at the time of the Viking raids and were made of timber and earth. Because they lived in violent times, feudal lords built home designed to serve as fortress. In 11th century, lords began to build castles of stone. Through of the massive walls and strong towers, the lord castles stood high in a rocky hill or by the bend of a river. There were no buildings near it. Castles was the fortified home of an important person such as a lord or king. They ranged from simple wood enclosure to vast stone palace. A castle allowed a lord to control the surrounding land. It also kept his family and riches safe from rebels while he was away at the war, fighting as a knight for the king. Enemies planned to attack and destroy castle. Enemies planned to attack and destroy castle. Attacking forces laid careful plans to capture a castle. Enemies tried to attack castles through filled part of the moat with logs and earth so they could cross it. Once they had a road to cross the moat, they tried to attack and go under over the castle fort. But when the defenders of castle alarmed that they attacked by their enemies, they heard boiling water, hot oil, melted lead, and huge of stone, and threw to the climbing soldiers or enemies. Some attackers tried to scale the wall, others tried to break it down with battering rams. Other soldiers manned machines that hurled stones against the wall until a section crumbled. Sometimes they used movable tower, the top of which was as high as the castle wall. And another method to attack was to tunnel under the castle walls. On the castle. The castles become home and fortress of lords and ladies, members of their family, knights and other men at arms, and also household officials and servants. The most important official was the steward. Steward obligation. steward recorded daily expenses and made certain that the cook and baker did not waste or steal food. Steward listed the livestock and produce in each village on the Lord's land and kept records of the taxes and rents owed by the peasants. Stewards was the one who kept records of Lord's land and revenue. The Great Hall was the most important room in the castle, where the lords and ladies ate, gave orders to servants, and received guests. At that time, clowns called as jesters, who amused the lord's visitors and made a clever remark in foolish actions. The duties of the noblewoman. The ladies of the castle supervised the household. She looked after the preparation of food and kept the garden when she grew herbs to use in cooking and for medicine. She also taught young girls in her household how to sew, spin, and weave, and she tended the sick and wounded. She took charge of all things when the lords away from castle. If the lord was taken prisoner by enemy in war, she raised the ransom to pay the lord's release. For the ladies' amusement and fun, they engaging themselves to play chess and other board games, or played musical instruments. A lady might also join her husband on the hunt, a favorite recreation of the medieval nobility. Noble daughter, which at the age of 14 was usually the age they allowed it to marry, to a man who was much older. If one nobleman's daughters decline the said marriage, their daughter becomes a nun. But when she agreed with it, her father was the one who arranged the marriage. In medieval times, people believed that men and women should bind as one. Through their beliefs came from Catholic Church that the marriage was a sacred one. Noble woman has its own political power. They had this power through inherited it. Matilda, the daughter of King Henry I, to establish her claim to the English throne.
Daño.
I'm Zelly Torres, BSN second year, saying, we can do this para sa bayan at kinabukasan.
So, thank you for watching our video. Hope you like it.